Welcome to this episode of Chattin with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got Jack O'Halloran. A lot of people know him from Superman, King Kong, Dragnet, but there's something about Jack you might not know. He is the son of Albert Anastasia.
Meyer and some people in New York were worried about, well, what are you going to do with this clown Bobby? And because Bobby was a thorn in their side already, and they said, "What are you going to do with him?" And he said, Joe Kennedy said, "Oh no, we're gonna send him to Ireland and make him ambassador to Ireland." And Giancana said, "Well, that's good." And so when he turned around, he whispered in his son's ear. He said, "Make your brother Attorney General." And Bobby became Attorney General, and his father went to him and he said, "Put all my good friends in jail." And he went after Giancana, he went after Hoffa, he went after everybody.
Why would he do that? Why would he send them all to jail so he can get rid of the problem?
Yeah, he wanted to get out from under thumb to Chicago. So they went after Giancana, they went after a lot of people. And and then Jack is going down to Dealey Plaza, and 4 people called Bobby on the phone and said, "Do not let your brother." In fact, Adlai Stevenson went and saw him and said, "Do not let your brother go to Texas. The animosity down there is terrible." Because another thing that Joe Kennedy did was he whispered in Jack's ear, "Those oil guys down there, now these are the guys that gave him a ton of money to get Johnson to run for it, right? Those oil guys down there, they're making a fortune off of a product called surplus oil. And they're not paying any tax on it. So you need to tax that product." So Jack figured, well, it's business. And he went down and they levied a tax. He went to Congress, they levied a tax on surplus oil. Well, that cost those guys a couple $100 million a year. So they were not happy puppies at all. And the animosity and it was all against Joe Kennedy. The animosity was terrible. Well, what people don't realize is that Jack Kennedy was a very sick individual. He was not going to live out his term. They used to shoot him up every day because he had suffered from what they call Addison's disease, which is a deterioration of the spinal canal. And he was in a lot of pain. And he also had syphilis and 2 other diseases. So he was in bad shape and he wasn't going to live out his term. And his father didn't want to see him die from medical reasons because he figured it would put a mark on the family. And people would say, well, that's kind of cold, man. Why would the guy? But look what he did to his daughter. His oldest daughter, Rose, he lobotomized her because she suffered from ADD before doctors knew what to do with that ADD. And she would dance on tables and stuff. She'd get a little loopy every once in a while. And he was afraid she was going to embarrass the family terrible. So he lobotomized her. And she sat in the building looking out the window all her life. And she lived to be a very old woman. But she lived in a terrible state. So
Wow.
What happened with Jack, he would rather see him die the way he died than die the other way. And he would die like a hero so here you got a president of the United States in an open car going down Dealey Plaza with the Bird Building, with all these people walking around, windows open and stuff. Should never have happened with the president right below you. Then they had people coming off of the train, all these hobos that were walking over that bridge. And one of them was Woody Harrelson's father, who was a hitman for New Orleans.
Yeah, he killed the judge. I know all about that story.
32 people in Dealey Plaza that day that could have assassinated him. And there were 13 shots fired. Now you got Zapruder, who never held a camera in his hands in his life, is standing up on a high area with 2 women holding his legs because he suffered from vertigo. Never took his finger off the trigger of that camera while all the gunshots are fired all around him and stuff. And he taped the Zapruder tape. And the Zapruder tape was bought by Life magazine for $150,000 before it was ever shot. So no one saw it for a year. But it was edited. They took 8 frames out of it because the 8 frames showed the driver take the last shot. And Kennedy got shot 3 times that day. And they all went with this one bullet theory from Oswald's gun and all this other jazz that the Warren Commission sold that to the public. And it was all rubbish because there was a prison right across from the Byrd building, and these guys are standing there looking right at that window that Oswald was supposed to be at, firing this rifle, a mail order rifle, okay? Mm-hmm. And there was 2 dark-complected guys and 1 white guy. So there were Cubans and a white guy that were in the window. Now, anybody that knows anything about weapons, you're talking about a mail order bolt action rifle, and you're shooting a shot of over 1,000 feet. And the variables were bad because you had the wind in Dealey Plaza was atrocious. Even the cops couldn't hear the microphones. And you had a car moving on an angle. You had trees and signs. So any shooter that's a sharpshooter would have to arrest his heart down to 60 because your pulse is in your finger and it's on a trigger. And to take 3 shots of any meaning within 28 seconds on a bolt action gun is bullshit. Never happened. Never with any accuracy anyway.
Yeah, you got to click it, put it back.
Well, it's just never going to happen. It just never happened in reality. So, and the fact is that if you're shooting him from that window, the car is going by you, they would have hit him in the back of the head and the front of his head would have come out. Yeah. But the first guy that got shot was Conley. Conley got shot and he fell in between the seats. And then Kennedy got hit in the throat, and you see him in the Zapruder film grab his throat and he fell forward. Yeah. And then he got shot in his lower back, and no one ever said anything about that for 10 years. And then the driver took the last shot and hit him right in the front and blew his head, and you see him fly backwards in the car, and the back of his head came out. And
so the driver just turned around?
Driver just turned rear. He turned around. He slowed the car. Instead of speeding up, he slowed the car down to almost 10 miles an hour, cut off the motorcycle cop, and turned and took a shot. And that's on the 8 frames. And that film's been seen on viral. The FBI put it out viral that it shows the driver, because the driver, Greer, did a deathbed accusation that he took that last shot. He made it well known. And so there's a lot of things. It was like every 10 years, somebody would come out with another version of what happened down there. Yeah. And, you know, the cauldron where John Roselli took the first shot from was big enough for me to walk from the river to the street. That's how big the cauldron was. And now they've cemented it over. They because people did a documentary on it. And so the whole thing was a farce about how and you know, when they did the autopsy on Kennedy, it was all fudged over, and it was done by interns. It wasn't done by any medical doctors until another 10 years later, somebody explained the fact that he was shot in the throat, and then he was shot, you know, and then they have supposedly a jar in a museum with Kennedy's brain in it. And how could it be in there when it was blown out the back of his head? You know, so there's so many lies that were told. And, you know, and Oswald was a total patsy. And, you know, they killed him right coming out in the garage when the Ruby went in and shot him because they wanted him out of the way. And when you see him come out, and they grabbed Oswald and blamed him for the assassination of Kennedy. And they took him in and they questioned him. There wasn't one tape or one file made up of any of the questions asked him.
And you can see his eye looks like he got punched in the face.
And this is the guy that shot the president of the United States. You understand? So they got rid of him when Ruby shot him, and Ruby should never have been allowed into that garage, especially carrying a gun. That should have never been. That's a no-no. But it was all set up to get rid of Oswald. And when they took Ruby and they locked Ruby up, they went to Ruby and Ruby said to them, "You can't question me here. You got to move me out of Dallas. This is not a safe place to talk to me." And they said, and they left him right there. And there were needles they got from Tulane University, which had a cancer research place, and they shot him up with cancer and they killed him. He died from cancer, and he never was sick a day in his life before he went to jail. So they eradicated people along the way so that the Warren Commission would stand up and be, boom, this was the gospel. And that shown to be bull. It's just they've done documentaries now about how Kennedy got shot in different places, and every 10 years they come out with new stuff, and it's makes me laugh when all this was there in the beginning and they just washed it over and they phased it out to where people just who cares anymore? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So has Frank or has anyone from the underworld ever talked to you about this situation?
The underworld had nothing to do with his death. And people always try to say, well, it was the mafia, it was the CIA, and because you got to look at what happened in the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs, Joe Kennedy told his son, he said, those soldiers can't have any bullets in their guns, because if they misfire or something, it's going to set off a terrible scene. Well, they all got slaughtered. They couldn't even defend themselves. They had no bullets in their guns. They all got killed in the Bay of Pigs, and that was because of the missile deal that was done with Cuba, and Joe Kennedy was involved in that. And so the CIA was very, very angry because there was a lot of guys that got killed there, and so they were angry. The oil people were angry. There was a lot of people that were very angry at Joe Kennedy, and they were going to take it out on his son. And that's what people made it believe, that they were the ones who were involved in orchestrating his killing. But that's not true. The whole thing at Dealey Plaza was orchestrated by one of the most prolific assassins in Europe, the guy called the Jackal, Carlos Sanchez. And Carlos was he was a clever guy, boy. He was the guy with the umbrella, and he triggered the whole thing off. And Carlos was a smart man, and everything was so taken out of order about who did this, who did what, where it came from, and who they were going to blame for this and blame for that, and that caused a lot of disarray. And no one ever really got the truth about what happened at Dealey Plaza that day.
A lot of people say Carlo Santo Trafficante had something to do with it.
No, they didn't. They had a lot of anger, but they was orchestrated by Carlos Sanchez, and then I know that for a fact. It was orchestrated by Carlos Sanchez, and this guy was so clever. I'll tell you how clever he was. He was a major assassin in Europe, and they could never catch him. And one time they thought they had him. And he went on a plane as a woman, and he had a prosthesis that built in that made it look like he had a vagina and everything. He went through an X-ray thing and all, and the plane as a woman and walked off as a man. He went in the bathroom, changed the stuff all around, and he walked off as a man. They never caught him. It was you could never see him face to face. He would come into a place as a priest, and the only way you could talk to him was in a confessional. So you never really saw him. He was clever. Wow. He was a smart guy. He was a pretty smart guy.
So let's shift it to your acting career. Well, before your acting career, you started with sports.
Well, I played a little football, and then I got out of that and went into boxing, and did quite well in fighting. A couple Hall of Fames, and I was California heavyweight champion. And then when I retired from boxing, I took a young man by the name of Frankie Lyles, and I made him super middleweight champion of the world. And I created a guy named Freddie Roach, who's one of the prolific trainers in the world today. Trained Pacquiao, and he trained a lot of great fighters. Wow. Freddie's a super kid. But they, in the transition of that, when I was in Boston, when I first started out, and I was like 10-0 or something like that, and Steve McQueen came in to do the Thomas Crown Affair. And we looked after him, and he and I became very good friends. And he said, "Wow, man, you got to come to Hollywood. Come down on the set. I want to put you in the movie. We'll get your SAG card. This would be great." I said, "I don't think so." I said, I'm looking to fight Ali for the title one day." And I turned it down. And he just couldn't believe I turned it down. Then I fought a guy out in L.A., Manuel Ramos, who was ranked number 2 in the world. And they came to me to do a fixture called The Great White Hope with James Earl Jones to play Jeff Swillard, and which would have taken me off the streets for 6 months. Because they went to Spain and they shot this movie in Spain. It was the biggest movie in Hollywood at the time. So I turned that down, and they couldn't believe I turned it down. I thought the deal was all made, just supposed to go in and sign a contract. And I said, "I'm ready to fight Ali. You want me to go to Spain for 6 months?" "I don't think so."
Yeah.
And then Eddie Foy was all upset because Raymond Patriarca was involved in putting the deal together. And they wanted to get me off the streets to protect me. And I said, I don't think so. So I turned it down. And then after I retired from boxing, I had an agent in San Diego when I was California heavyweight champion. I did a lot of commercials.
Yeah.
And she called me on the phone. She said that they want you to do a film, and I think you should really do it. I said, "What film?" She said, "Farewell, My Lovely" with Robert Mitchum. And I said, well, I looked around. I said, maybe it's time I do this. And I went to Hollywood, and they did a screen test. I met the director in New York, and then he flew me out to Hollywood to do a screen test I did with Harry Dean Stanton. And Mitchum said, "It's either him or I don't do the movie." So I blame it all on Robert Mitchum.
He's the start of your whole career, huh?
He was my mentor. He was just an incredible individual, and he taught me a lot. He didn't teach me how to act. He taught me about the business and how things work and what you should do to protect yourself. And he was very smart at that. He was very clever the way that he handled myself. And he said to me, the very first day I ever went to work with him, he designed for us to drive to work together so he could talk to me. And when we got dressed in our monkey suits and went over and we were getting ready to do the first shot, he said to me, "You read that script, kid?" And I said, "Read it, man. I know your role, my role, Charlotte Rampling, John Ireland." He said, "Good, throw it in the trash can." I said, "What?" He said, "Let me tell you something. Don't let me catch you doing what thousands of people do when they come to Hollywood. That's trying to act. Just be yourself.